Muslims all over the world celebrated Mawlid and Nabi, the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. It's a big celebration. You wouldn't have known about it from our papers, but there's always articles in there about the threat of Islamist extremism. Do we misunderstand Islam? Miriam Francois Sarah, do we misunderstand?
Well, I mean, clearly I think that we do misunderstand Islam. As a convert to the faith, I somewhat sympathise with a lot of the misconceptions that do abound, just because prior to my own investigation of the faith, I had quite a lot of negative perceptions myself. And it really does take some effort to get past sort of what's widely held to be truths about the faith to really understanding it. So I find that the misconceptions can vary from what I'd call the relatively innocuous, not realising that Allah is just the Arabic word for God and not the idea that Muslims somehow worship some sort of moon god, to you know, the sometimes sympathetic stroke, slightly patronising assumption that all Muslim women need liberation from Western feminists or even Western armies, through to, unfortunately, things like 51% of Britons polled thinking that Islam is responsible for, you know, the July 7th bombings.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a huge range of misconceptions in the broader we as a society, and then within the Muslim community there are a whole set of misconceptions, and I think...
And dangerous interpretations.
There are fringe movements.
It's part of the problem. It is the, you know, unlike the Bible, it is believed to be absolutely the received word of God to the Prophet Muhammad, and so, and some of the verses seem, to outsiders perhaps, to be pretty unambiguous. You mentioned women there.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can just read out a couple on women. Surah 2:223. Your wives are your field. Go in, therefore, to your field as you will. And Surah 4:38. Men are in charge.